In this slideshow, I'm going to talk about the Greek verb. So in this PowerPoint, I'm going to go over a summary of the endings of the verbs. And I'm going to begin with just giving you an overview of the principal parts. And what the endings that we're going to focus on are going to be the present, future, and aorist. So in this principal part list, the importance of the principal part is that each principal part tells you how you should conjugate the verb under that specific tense system. So we're going to start with the present system. Okay, so in the present system, we have we can notice that there are basically three types of endings that are following here. So we can see that there are some verbs that have omega, then we have some verbs that have my, and then some verbs have me, and so those are the basic endings, though there are some what look like weirdos here. So we have for example, dedoika and dedia. These are actually perfect, so we're going to scratch them out. And for now, we'll deal with them when we get to the perfect. And day here is just the third person singular, so because it's an impersonal verb, so it's really fits into the omega group. You have some omegas that are contracts, so epsilon, alpha, right? Here you have an epsilon. This is an epsilon contract, impersonal verb. Okay. All right. So these are the types of verbs. We have in the present system then the three types of verbs, i.e. the three conjugation types we see manifested are omega and me, and then my, which is your deponent. Okay, so there are basically then two conjugations, omega and me. And how you know which conjugation your verb is in the present system is by that first principal part. So if your principal part ends in omega, then it is conjugated in the omega group. And so the endings then are o, ace, a, amen, et, usi. Now some of the omega group are what we call contract verbs. And they're only contracted really in Attic. In other dialects, they don't behave this way, or they behave differently. But the point is that what's happening is, to get your stem, right, you always knock off that first personal ending, first person personal ending, right? And that leaves you with your stem. And so in the omega, if you knock off the omega in an alpha contract, you're left with this alpha. Epsilon contract, you're left with the epsilon. Of the omicron contract, you're left with the omicron. And then you put the endings right on. So a, o, a, ace, a, omen, a, ete, a, usi. This is uncontracted. An Attic likes to contract. They don't like to have so many vowels in a row, so they contract. And so that's what's happening with the contract verbs. So these ones are really omega verbs, only that they are the endings look different from o, ace, a, amen, et, usi in the contracted form, because they are contracting all of these vowels. If you, in the uncontracted form, they're perfectly fine. They have the same endings. Okay. Now, in the middle passive or the deponent. So some of the verbs we noticed had my, right? Which meant that they were middle passives or deponents. They're using the middle passive endings and they are deponents. So they look middle passive, but they are actually active. Okay? And so in this group, you get the endings are omai, a, etai, omata, esta, ontai. And so this group is coming out of an omega group. So an omega verb in the middle passive, the endings are omai, a, etai, omata, esta, ontai. And the thing to notice is that there's what we call a gluing vowel, omicron, epsilon are the two gluing vowels, right? So omicron and epsilon are the two gluing vowels that are going onto the stem in between the ending. The ending is my, it's a here, tai, metha, the, ontai. This is the ending, only that with omega verbs, they have a buffer between the ending and the stem in the middle. And so you get omai. So luomai, for example. Lue, luetai, luameta, luesta, luontai. I'll come back to what's going on here, but just suffice it to say that just memorize this ending. It's the process of a long shift. So we have our, back to omegas then, we have omega in the active, o, ace, a, amen, et, usi. The contracts have the same endings. You're tacking it onto that vowel that's on the stem. So it's ace, a, o, ace, a, amen, et, usi. And if there's a vowel, the vowel is there. Right? Now, the thing is that, as I said, in Attic, they contract these vowels, and that's why the endings look different, but they're really not. Okay, same thing happens in the middle. So the middle endings are my, e, etai, ometa, esta, ontai. And the thing here is that you're putting on this vowel to glue the ending on, the my ending on. And so this omai ending is going to interact with the vowel if it's an alpha contract or epsilon contract or omicron contract. So it's a omai, e omai, a omai, right? So then the endings are going to be contracted again, same thing, because the vowel is going to interact with the other vowels. Okay, so this is the deponent's middle passive for verbs that fall under this omega group. And in the middle passive, how you can tell that you're dealing with an omega middle passive is the fact that it's going to have omicron and epsilon as its gluing vowel in these positions. Okay, all right. Now, the mi-verbs, you identify them because they have mi in the stem, or the first principal part ending, right? So that these endings are mi, sigma, you tack sigma onto the stem, si, men, te, asi. That's it. So mi, sigma, si, men, te, asi. Okay? And in the middle, the endings are mai, sai, tai, methus, the entai. So what differs between the middle passive or deponent verbs that are mi, that come out of this mi conjugation, is this question of whether there's a vowel. Omicron is not omai, it's whatever the stem vowel is. So you don't get omai, you don't get etai, you don't get ometha, you don't get estha, you don't get onta. You just get my Tai, methas, the entai. That's what you're getting. So something like tithemi in the middle will be tithemai. So epsilon emai, right? Because you're stacking the mai right onto the stem without this intermediary omicron or epsilon. Now, what about psi and e? Okay? So what I want to show you, I want to emphasize, and hopefully it helps you remember, is that these are actually different stages of the same ending. So the psi is the ancient ending, and the a is the more developed ending of the same ending, right? So if the fact is that omega verbs have this gluing vowels, omicron or epsilon, right? Omicron when it's dealing with a mu or a nu, and epsilon when it's dealing with a sigma or a tau, right? So we have here tau and sigma, so you get epsilon, right? So here we're gonna, if in the old days, ancient old days, if we were gonna put on luo, whoops, let me get luo. So we're gonna have luo, right? And we're going to put on the ending, so we get rid of our omega. And then we're going to put on our ending, second person ending, the old second person ending, which would be psi, right? We have to put an epsilon before the sigma, because epsilon goes before sigma, right? Or tau, right? So here we're going to put psi, so we need to have an epsilon. Okay, and so I'm going to make the epsilon in red here. So here's our epsilon. That is our gluing vowel. And then we put our ending, which is psi. So I'm going to make the ending blue. Psi. Okay, so this is the ancient ending of luo in the middle. Okay? Now, over time, the process, what's going to happen is this is going to develop, progress, as it were, and what you're going to have is the sigma is going to fall out, like that. Sigma falls out, and then we're going to now have lu e I. Okay, and we already saw that we don't like the situation of so many vowels together. So if you have epsilon alpha iota, what does that give you? The answer is it gives you a, right? So we get lu a. Or the eta, lu a. Okay, that'll be our ending. Okay, so the point I'm trying to really stress is that this ending and this ending are things that actually make the difference between these two, right? Are the these two endings here are what makes these guys different. But what's really happening is that this just shows that this is the mi-verbs are just an older form of the way to conjugate Greek verbs. Okay, and that ultimately the endings are the same, right? Certainly in the middle they are. It's my, this should be psi, but it's an omega verb, so it's a. Tai, methas, the entai. And with omega verbs, you attach the omicron epsilon. That's what indicates. So if you look at our charts of principal parts, and we have a my verb. And it's not omai, and we're in the present system, we're in the present principal part, and it's not omai, but it's a am I or am I, right? That means that we are dealing with a mi-verbs deponent. That's what's going on. Okay? All right. All right, now let's talk about the secondary system of the present system. So that is the past tense. Now, you need an augment to indicate that we're in the secondary system, and then we're going to put the endings on. So with omega verbs, the endings are on, as, amen, et, on. And when you move to the middle or deponent, you see that it's main, and then eta, ametha, estha, onta. Again, the issue is, of course, this omega verbs and their relationship to their endings. You notice again, you see the omicron, epsilon alternation happening, right? So it's on, as, amen, et, on over here. And then if you're dealing with the contract verbs, you get, again, you're just putting the ending onto the stem that has that vowel on it. When you knock off the omega, you had that alpha, so you're just putting the ending straight onto that. And then because it's attic that we're working with, attic likes to contract. So that's what's happening. So then if we move to the middle of the deponent, middle passive for the deponents, we see we're putting on amen, eta, ametha, estha, onta. And again, when we move to the contract ones, we see again, it's the alpha is there, so we can just alpha, amen, epsilon, amen, omicron, amen. And then because it's attic, you're going to produce the appropriate contraction. So in the mi-verbs, the endings are nu, sigma, nothing, so nothing for the stem, men, te, san. So one way of thinking about the difference between the omega and the mi-verbs here in the imperfect is that or think about in general, is that the omega verbs like to protect the stem from the outside world, whether that's the endings or just exposure to the outside world, right? Whereas the mi-verbs do not. They just, the stem and the endings, and just go together. There's no buffer zone. And so what you have is you're just putting the endings straight onto the stem. So when you get into the middle, it's the same thing. You're just putting the endings straight onto the stem. So main, so, ta, methas, the, enta. And just as with the present, the same thing happens here with the second person. U and so are the same thing, because once again, the rule was that if you are tacking on an ending onto the omega verbs, you need a buffer, and when it's a sigma, it's epsilon. When it's a mu or a nu, it's omicron. And so let's go with lu again, and we're going to put the ending so on. That's the older ending. If we were going to put the ending on, well, we need a buffer, right? And the buffer would be epsilon because of the so. And there's our so. And so what happens in the process of time, the epsilon goes away. Oh, sorry, not the epsilon. Put the epsilon back. The omicron goes away. Or so sigma goes away. Sigma goes away, leaving us with lu et al. Well, epsilon omicron gives you u, which is u, right? And so that is there. So again, so the endings really are main second person is going to be weird. The second person is actually what tells you that you're dealing with the omega versus the mi-verbs. So it's main u if it's omega, so if it's mi, to, meta, ste, and to. Same endings. All right. So now let's move to the future. Future, we're really only dealing with omega verbs. There is no mi-verbs in the future. So the endings are going to be just omega and my on my verbs. So let's look at what we get. So you only really have, even in the omega verbs, you only have the one contracted form, which is going to be epsilon contract. So it's going to be omega or epsilon contracts. And similarly for the middle, you're going to have omai and the epsilon contract for the middle, omai. And there are no mi-verbs in the future, right? So there's no mi conjugation, because mi-verbs become omega verbs in the future. And then you have the future passive, which we had a whole thing on, where you're going to use that last principal part, and then you're just going to use omai with the sigma somai as your ending. So again, it's an omega verb in the middle endings. All right, so now we move to the aorist. We split out again into different ways of conjugating. And so again, if you look at the aorist list, you can see that there are different kinds of aorists. There's the ones that have on, ones that have sa, and let's see, there's the ones that have omain. Let's see, there's another one here. There's ones that have ein or own, and there's those that have ka. All right, so you got to organize these into some kind of logical grouping. All right, so the way we do it is we talk about weak versus strong. So weak ones follow a recognizable pattern, have a recognizable expected outcome. So here are, on the one column, all the kinds of verbs according to their type that Master Nardi has organized for us. And this is what you expect the aorist to be according to the type. So if it's an omicron or a mi-verb, the aorist in the expected type should be sa. So deiknumi, for example, is edeiksa. So contract, of course, they're going to have asa, or if it's alpha contract, asa. If it's alpha contract in front of a rho, epsilon iota, it's asa. If it's omicron, it's osa. All right, then there are stems in zo, adzo, idzo. Well, they become asa, isa. Then you have, whether it's a labial, velar, dental, etc., it will have whatever the labial reaction to a sigma gives you sa. The velar reaction to a sigma gives you xa with a xi. And the dental interaction with a sigma gives you sa. And then you have your double lambdas, ila, your rho, iro gives you ira, and your iota nu gives you ina. Okay, so these are all predictable, so these are weak. So if your aorist has this kind of ending, or started off as an omega or like this, and it has the appropriate expected aorist ending, then it's weak. Okay? And the endings are going to be a, as, e, am, and ate, an. That's it. That's the endings, no matter what this is. So sa, se, samen, sate, san. We can have ila, ilas, el, ile, ilamen, ilate, ilan. Right? And if it's middle, or if it's a deponent form of this, you can know it's a deponent form of the aorist because it'll have amen. A weak aorist will have amen. The alpha, amen, right? And then if that's the case, then you conjugate amen, o, ato, ametha, sta, asta, anto, right? And in the passive, The aorist passives are regular. We could claim they're weak if you want. They follow. They don't. There's no weird deviations for aorist passives. So notice they have they have what we call the secondary mi-verb endings. Nu, sigma, nothing, men, te, san. Right? Remember, those are the same endings we saw for the imperfect in the mi-verbs. Nu, sigma, men, te, san. This is the same endings. So that's what you'll have on the aorist passive in the weak. So then all the ones that don't seem to behave properly, we'll just call those strong. So we have, okay, balo, ebalon is not expected. So that's a strong one. Okay. Let's see here. Egnon, not expected. Let's see. Ebane, diabane, not expected. Diabalon, diagnon, diadoka. None of these are expected, so they must be strong. Okay, so what happens when we're dealing with so these are the strong aorists, and we have like 3 situations here that could happen. The most common, so 90% of all strong aorists are going to look like the imperfect. The endings are going to look like the imperfect. So on, es, amen, eta, on. Or amen, u, eta, ametha, esta, onta. And if it started off as a mi-verb, it will be en, sigma, men, te, san. Okay? So these are the strong aorists. The predominant amount of strong aorists are going to look like the imperfect. Now, there are weirdos. So I don't consider histemi a weirdo, but its strong aorist helps out with the actual weirdos, which is haliskomai, bino, gignosko, and duo. So what you're doing here is you're putting the imperfect endings or the secondary endings of the mi-verbs onto this aorist stem of these verbs. So with bino, with haliskomai, it's halo, so he alone, and so then you put the endings on. He alone, he alos, he nothing, so he alo, and then he alomen, he alote, he alosan. Similar with bino. Ebane, ebase, ebe, ebemen, ebete, ebesan. And so histemi has hestain, hestes, heste, hestamen, hesteta, hestasi, hestasan. Right? So, okay. So these ones all do that. And there are only these 4, so you just have to memorize them. So these are the 4 to memorize. Haliskomai, bino, gignosko, and duo. All right, and then there's the really just completely annoying irregular verbs, and they're also really common, so you just have to know them. It's tithemi, hiemi, and didomi. They have ka, kas, ke in the singular active. Men, te, san. They're perfectly fine in the plural, right? Because you expect as mi-verbs that they should have en, sigma, men. It's in a nothing, right? Instead they have ka, kas, ke. So what they're doing is actually borrowing from the perfect, but we won't get into that. Just memorize it. And then their middle passive, they are completely expected. Main, so, ta, methas, the, and ta. Completely as one would expect. Okay, and so that is how the endings can be summarized. So it's best to focus on the weirdos and worry about the other ones. Because if you memorize one of the other ones, you've got them. But the weirdos you need to control. Okay.